was in the second class of WASP, and here's her story. The coolest thing my mother ever said was, anyone can fly a plane, but you know who the pilots are when things go wrong. When I was growing up, I occasionally realized that older people were impressed by my mother, and that baffled me. Why should they be impressed by Mom? Just because she flew planes in World War II? I assumed everybody's mom had flown planes in World War II. Over the years, Mom had told us one or two snippets, always in an offhanded way. One time I had to put a plane into a nosedive to restart the engine, and then she'd wander off and we wouldn't hear the end of it. And I never asked enough questions. Mom was not inclined to talk about herself, but through the years I learned that she graduated from high school at the age of 16, and that she'd always wanted to be a pilot. And she didn't have enough money for flight lessons, so she traded elbow grease for lessons at a small airport down the road. And soon she became one of their best flight instructors. But I didn't know any of the history. So in 1940, Mom was 21 years old. She'd grown up in Woodstock, New York, and down the road at a little airport in Kingston, New York. She took her lessons, and within months, she became the first woman in Ulster County to receive a commercial rating. And she was hired by that airport as a flight instructor. And the owner of that airport also had an airport in Sanford, Florida. So every fall, the instructors would fly the plane south to Florida and instruct through the winter. And then every spring, like migrating songbirds, they'd fly north again and instruct through the summer. It was a great business plan. Well, one fall day, December afternoon in 1941, Mom was on her way to Florida, and all of a sudden, when she was over Savannah airspace, 2 Army Air Force planes came up alongside her, one on each wing, and the pilots were gesticulating wildly for her to put the plane down now. So she did, and she was escorted to the base commander's office, where she learned that Pearl Harbor had just been attacked, and all private air traffic was grounded, and the United States would soon officially join the war. Early in 1942, and most of you know this, General Hap Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces, realized that he was running low on pilots. Losses were heavy on the battlefronts, and he knew that in order to win the war, he needed aircraft that were faster, lighter, and more efficient. So production around the country ramped up, and factories went into overdrive. Bell Aircraft was producing P-39 Air Cobra and P-63 King Cobra pursuit planes in Niagara Falls, as well as B-27 bombers in Marietta, Georgia. Boeing was producing bombers in Seattle and Wichita. Curtiss Wright was in Buffalo, Columbus, and St. Louis, Missouri. Douglas was on the West Coast. Goodyear, Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Northrop, Republic Aviation, and Beech all had factories around the country. And North American was in Kansas City, Dallas, and Inglewood, California, where they were producing the speediest pursuit plane of all, the sleek and sexy P-51 Mustang, which became an important and sentimental icon in our family because it was Mom's favorite plane to fly. Between 1942 and 1944, over 300,000 aircraft of more than 75 different types were produced around the country. And they all had to be flown from the factories to air bases where they would either be used in training or sent overseas into combat. And it was at this time that General Arnold agreed to the formation of the WASP, and Mom was one of the first to join. The women who became WASP ranged in ages from 18 to 31, and they were from varied backgrounds. Most were single, some were married, some were mothers. Some had already lost husbands and brothers in combat, and some were wealthy socialites, and others, like Mom, could barely afford flight lessons. Some had been crop dusters, air racers, flight instructors. Some had delivered the mail, and others were stunt pilots. The women of the WASP faced mixed acceptance by the male instructors and officers and the military in general. They never knew if, when landing at an airfield or entering a room, they would be met with resentment and crude remarks, or acceptance, or just be ignored. But the general ambivalence of the men towards the WASP often turned into admiration as the women's piloting abilities became evident. Mom was in the second graduating class. Sweetwater was not yet home to the WASP. So her class trained in Houston, and then they brought their advanced trainers here just before graduation, and they graduated on Avenger Field. And during training in Houston, Mom met her best friend, Martha Wagensile, and they became lifelong friends, and our families knew each other as we grew up. So I'd like to tell you Martha's account of the last day of training in Houston. Because of the quirky Houston weather, most of us were low on hours and had to catch up, and I needed 4 hours. So I headed out in a T6 Texan. It was a really hot day, and when I saw the Gulf of Mexico, I thought maybe I'd put the plane down and go for a swim. I did not realize how soft the sand was. When I started to land, I buried the wheels. I revved the engine, and after a while, the wheels caught, and I was able to take off, and I figured I would wash out of the program if I couldn't have gotten back into the air. Well, on the way back to the airfield, I saw another T6, and I assumed it was a WASP catching up on her hours too. I thought I knew what formation flying was, and I thought it would be cool to fly in close and impress them when we landed at the field. So I pulled up really close behind the right wing because I thought that's how you did it. And when I looked over, the pilot was our commanding officer, Major Farmer. As soon as I landed, I was summoned to his office, and I just knew he would dismiss me from the program. He was very mad at me, and he scolded me for 10 minutes about the dangers of flying close to another plane and how I'd endangered my career as a military pilot. He said the only reason he was not washing me out of the program was because of my very good record, and he wanted me to graduate with my class. And then he asked me out. After graduation, Mom and Martha and their class were assigned to ferry brand new planes from the factories, and they had to know how to fly several different kinds of planes. Mom had checked out on at least 19 different types, including observation planes, trainers, the C-78 transport, the B-25, and the B-26 bombers. But her passion were the pursuits. The P-40, the P-39, the P-63, the P-47 Thunderbolt, and her favorite of all, the P-51 Mustang. Mom was just one of 134 WASP who were qualified to fly the pursuits, and they were very busy. In her 18 months as a ferry pilot, she racked up almost 1,500 hours, and more than half of those were in the pursuits. They were her most enjoyable and euphoric hours as a pilot, and probably ever in her life. 1,074 women became WASP, and during the 2-year program, there were 38 fatalities, as you know. The error record of the women was 1/7 that of the men, and the reputation of the WASP is legendary in military aviation. Well, Mom was nearly one of those fatalities twice, because ferrying brand new planes can be risky. What if a factory worker made a mistake? What if a part was defective? And there were always rumors of sabotage in the background. Mom had just lifted a P-51 off the runway in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She tried to retract the landing gear and it jammed. And then her engine quit. And she was hurtling at 150 miles an hour above the runway. And it was very narrow. There was a fence on one side, fuel trucks on the other. There was a crowd of people towards the end of the runway waiting to board one of the earliest airliners. And at the end of the runway, railroad cars on the railroad tracks. Mom put the plane down and careered down the runway. She avoided the fuel trucks, and she came to a stop right before the rapidly dispersing crowd. A 4-day investigation revealed that water had infiltrated the underground fuel tanks. So Mom's plane and the 9 other Mustangs waiting to take off behind her had to be refueled, and they finally got underway. And another time on a delivery to Great Falls, Montana, Mom was at 8,000 feet above Minneapolis. Her first fuel tank was running low, so she switched to the second tank, and her engine quit. So she switched back to the first tank, and she did the only thing she knew to do. She put the P-63 into a nosedive, hoping to restart the prop and spin it fast enough to restart the engine. Obviously it worked because I'm here, my sister as well. And Mom flew on to Fargo, North Dakota, where she put down on the runway, and the ground crew discovered that the factory had neglected to remove a plug in the line to the second tank. So they removed it, and she was on her way and did her delivery. 2 of Mom's friends were among the 38 who died. Virginia Moffett was coming in for a landing in Ontario, California, when her plane went into a steep dive and crashed in front of my mother and the other WASP who had just landed. And one of the last WASP to die on duty, who you'll hear about later on this afternoon, Hazel Ying Lee, was already a seasoned and accomplished pilot when she joined the WASP at the age of 31. She was the old lady, and she was the favorite of all the WASP. On Thanksgiving Day of 1944, Hazel was flying the same route as Mom, a P-63 into Great Falls. And Hazel had begun her descent into the airport when a group of other P-63s arrived. Some were flown by WASP and others by male pilots, and one of the planes had a defective radio. And that pilot was using hand signals with another pilot to communicate to the radio towers on the ground. For some reason, that plane drifted above Hazel's as she was making her descent, and neither of the pilots were aware of the situation. But the control tower saw what was happening and just yelled, "Pull up." Well, of course, the upper plane could not hear that because of the defective radio, but Hazel heard it, and she thought that order was for her. So she did pull up directly into the plane above her, and both planes crashed to the ground and burst into flame. By the time, so they got the male pilot out quickly, but Hazel was stuck in her cockpit. And by the time they were able to rescue her, she'd been badly burned, and she died 2 days later of her injuries. And because it was a civilian program, there was no money to get bodies back to their families. And it was common for the WASP to take up collections among themselves, not just enough to get the body home, but enough so that one of them could accompany their friend back to her family. General Arnold had witnessed firsthand the contributions these women had made to the war effort, and he tried to convince Congress to bring the program into the military to ensure its continuity. Well, the measure failed by 19 votes because some men in Congress thought that, first of all, women couldn't fly planes, and secondly, that they shouldn't fly planes, and third, that they were taking jobs away from men. So on December 20th of 1944, the WASP flew their last flights and packed their bags. Some of the base commanders gathered their pilots together to express their gratitude for jobs well done, but largely there was no official ceremony or recognition, and the women returned to their previous lives, and it would not be until the 1970s, 30 years later, that American women pilots would again be allowed or trusted to fly military aircraft. Mom returned to her job as a flight instructor, and when the war ended and Dad was discharged from the Army, he and his brother decided to take flying lessons. 2 instructors walked towards them, and Dad said to his brother, "I'll take the pretty one." And a year later, Mom and Dad were married. They moved with 2 Piper Cubs to my grandparents' farm in the Catskill Mountains. And Mom continued to instruct until we kids started being born. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter signed a bill granting veteran status to the WASP. And when Mom died in 2007, she had a military funeral. In 2010, thanks to the efforts of WASP Dee Parrish and daughter Nancy, who we saw last night, the WASP were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. And my siblings and I attended the ceremony in Washington, D.C. with hundreds of other WASP family members. And we met a handful of WASP there who had known Mom, and that was very special for us. Mom had left us some photo scrapbooks, a couple of newspaper interviews, and a few Army documents. And there was a collection of Mom's favorite things in an old wooden cigar box, and my sister and I rediscovered these treasures that Mom had given us peeks at through the years. An old pair of dice that they used to fight boredom as they were waiting for the base to take off. Her flight watch, a few medals, her Civil Air Patrol pin, and sacred to us, her 43 W2 wings, which have that insignia on the front. And they are here on display across the way in the display case on her Santiago blue dress jacket. We also found, I don't have it on, oh, goodness, Mom's silver dollar. She carried it with her on every flight that she ever made. Her father had given it to her when she started to fly. Aww. When she was bored, socked in by bad weather, sometimes for days in a row, she'd bounce it off the concrete and catch it again, so the edges are all banged up and dinged. The coin is precious to our family because it was precious to her. These sentimental items were the sum of Mom's WASP experience in aviation history. But once I saw the silver dollar, I knew I had the beginning of a book. But then it took years for the form to come together. I knew I didn't want to write a book of dry facts because there are plenty out there. I wanted an excitement that would hold the attention of a younger generation, and I wanted it to exemplify the women, the strength of women. So I decided to tell the story of a strong woman through historical fiction, from the perspective of a young great-granddaughter learning about her great-grandmother's aviation history. It's set on my parents' dairy farm in the Catskill Mountains, and much of it comes right out of our childhood. And Mom's adventures are woven throughout the book. But writing my mom in fiction was tricky. I had to stay true to what I knew to be her story, so I compromised. In the book, when Mom is in the air, flying, those accounts are true to the best of my ability and knowledge. I did a lot of research to make the situations as realistic as possible. When Mom's engine quit and she had to put the P-63 into a nosedive, I knew she'd been at 8,000 feet when she started, but I didn't know what altitude she was at when she pulled out. So I researched nosedives and P-63s and physics, and I interviewed pilots to get a sense of the appropriate altitude. And that's when I discovered that the P-63 was one of the least stable planes for a nosedive because of a tendency for them to go into a flat spin and not recover. And that really scares me every time I think of it, because Mom had a better chance of not surviving than of restarting that engine. And holy cow, she did it. Writing a historical novel gave me the flexibility to play with adventure while retaining facts and actual events. Winston Churchill and his daughter Mary really visited Niagara Falls during the time frame that Mom would have been there picking up a P-63 to take to Montana. How could I not put that in the book? I wrote Silver Dollar Girls during the long months of COVID. We had lockdown, and there was a lot of surrounding uncertainty. And that became an opportunity to include the story of COVID, seen through the eyes of a 6-year-old who completely misunderstood the pandemic and what that was about. Eventually, Silver Dollar Girls became a book. Would Mom have liked it? I think she would have at least been amused. Although she generally kept her feelings and emotions intact and in check, I hope she'd have been proud to have part of her story told. My test for the book, to see if it passed muster, was to send a copy here to Jordan at the WASP Museum, and I asked her to not only read it and assess it, but also please tell me if it was authentic enough for them to want to sell in the gift store. And I was on pins and needles, and then I heard back, yes, they liked the book, and yes, they would sell it. And I cried. That was the approval I needed. I couldn't ask Mom. This was what I had. I was so completely humbled and honored by that, and it means the world to me. The most satisfying aspect of all of this is that people who read Silver Dollar Girls will know the story of Mom and the WASP. So I'm very grateful and humbled to have this opportunity to keep the story alive. So I talk at military museums and air shows and veterans groups around the country, any place that'll have me. And I appreciate every opportunity to keep the story alive. And I'd like to show you some pictures. So, let's see what we can do here. And I'm kind of in the way, right? So let me move over. Okay, that's good. Okay, yep. You know what? If you put it right there, I'll copy it. Okay, thank you. All right, how are we doing on time? You all right?
Got about 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so Mom, I'm going to show you quite a few pictures of Mom, who we think is beautiful. This was from the traveling exhibit at the Congressional Gold Medal Ceremony. And we were so pleased to look up on the wall, and there was Mom. 43W2 was the first class to graduate here at Avenger Field on May 28th of 1943. And in this picture, Jackie had just pinned on Mom's wings. Mom in her winter bomber jacket, possibly taken at her barracks in Romulus, Michigan, but we're not sure. And I used that image on the cover of the book. How could I not? So this is a Bell factory photo of what we think. Now, we have a couple of historians in the room. Please correct me if I get any of this wrong, and if you can help identify anybody, let me know. So we think that this is possibly the first time that WASP had arrived at the Bell factory to pick up P-63s. I think that's a King Cobra in the back. I'm pretty sure I got confirmation on that. So this would have been a momentous occasion, and that's probably why all those men felt like they had to be in the picture. So my mom is in the bomber jacket to your left. Margaret Hamilton is in the middle, and I do not know who the third WASP on the right is, and I would love to have an identification on that at some point. So Martha Wagensile, as I said, was Mom's best friend, and she's in a lot of our life and the book. And this is Martha in front of a plane. Mom and Martha modeling a Santiago blue uniform. Because they were in the second class, they didn't have anything when they started. There was barely a WASP program started when their class came through. They were still dressed in men's trousers and flight shirts to deliver the planes. Finally, they started getting WASP things given to them, and this was the dress uniform that was so wonderfully designed by Bergdorf Goodman, and apparently the uniforms were fitted by Neiman Marcus. Possibly that the berets were made by Fredericks of Hollywood, and they were very proud and they looked pretty splashy. And the Santiago blue WASP uniform was the basis for the dress blues that the men wear now. Mom and Martha often had an opportunity to deliver planes together, which always made them very happy. Here they just landed a pair of North American basic combat trainers to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Martha has on a very spiffy flight outfit and cool shades because she was always fashionable. And Mom is still in her bomber and her parachute. Speaking of parachutes, you can see how precarious the fit is on most of these chutes. Every WASP was issued a parachute, but it wasn't until they started dying from, because they jumped from out of planes that the Army realized they needed to provide the women with more training. So on October 24th of 1944, the tail of Betty Stein's plane caught fire, and she bailed out over the mountains in Arizona. High winds had affected her landing, and she was dragged across the rugged terrain before they found her, barely alive. She later died of her injuries, and if she had had more training on landing in high winds, she might have survived. After this, a 2-week training course was added to the curriculum of the WASP, and the parachute harnesses were then redesigned specifically to fit the women. Mom's friend Hazel Lee. She was Chinese American and the oldest woman I said to join. She was one of the most experienced pilots to become a WASP. And according to all accounts, she was the friendliest of all of them and a good friend to all. And whenever Mom mentioned Hazel's accident, you could tell that it had affected her throughout her whole life. On my grandparents' farm, Mom and her Piper Cub, Patience, which she called a paper cup, and she continued to instruct in the Piper Cub until we were born. So my sister and our friend and I commissioned this museum quality panel, which tells about the WASP and as well as Mom's service. We had noticed that smaller museums and airfields sometimes have a little bit about WASP history without having very much at all, and no comprehensive way to tell the story and give people a good idea of what the WASP is all about. So we have placed so far almost a dozen of these in small museums and around the country so that more people can be educated about the WASP. But there are so many more places to go. Just another picture of cool Mom. So that was Mom's summer bomber jacket. And Mom had worn that jacket nearly every day after the WASP were disbanded. She was a farm wife. She had chores to do, a large garden to keep, 4 kids to raise. This was probably her warmest piece of clothing, and she wore it almost every day of the year. There was a lot of wear and tear. And in the 1970s, she donated that jacket to the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. And my sister and my cousin and I visited there last fall, and we were able to see the jacket in the process of being restored by this wonderful historic fabric magician named Sarah Gilcrease. And we're hoping that the jacket is back on display by next summer. You can see how beat up and worn out Fifino has been. Over the years, the WASP had held frequent reunions around the country to gather together and remember their service and relive their best days. And at each reunion, there were fewer WASP in attendance. So Martha's sitting there to the left with a white shirt, and Mom's directly behind her in the peach. We've identified several of these women, but I really need to sit down and do more. And the woman standing next to my mom in the yellow shirt is Franny Diaz, And when I was 15-year-old, Franny's husband, Gus, gave me an interesting ride in a Stompe, 1936 Stompe biplane over Elko, Nevada. And he was, how can I say this gently, a little aged at the time. And all I was thinking was, if he has a heart attack while I'm up here, I don't know how to fly this plane. I'm not sure how we'll get back down. But we did, and it was all fun. Another reunion, Mom and Martha are seated in the front. Franny's right behind Martha. And I know that many of these women are recognizable, and sometime I would love more identification. This picture was at a reunion, and it must have been after Martha passed, because Mom's in the middle with other friends and Martha's not in the picture. So Mom left us pictures, but there were not dates or places or names on them. So we try our best to piece it together, but we're never sure. So if anybody recognizes, oh yeah, that was San Diego in 1920, whatever, let me know. When we went to the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony, we were so fortunate to meet Vi Cowden, who was like 5'0" and a ball of energy. It was hard for Nancy and me to keep up with her. She had known Mom, and she was 93 in this picture. Vi had been born in a sod house in South Dakota in 1916. And then when she was 89 years old, she skydived with the Army's elite Golden Knights. And Vi once said, the worst thing about flying is coming back to Earth. I would stay up, but you do run out of gas. And Vi passed away the year after this. Hap Arnold was truly disheartened and dismayed to have let these women go. They helped him win the war, and he recognized them for the exceptional and outstanding skills of pilots that they were. So this plaque of recognition is over at the wishing well by the college and the hangar. It would have struck a poignant chord with every WASP we've ever seen it. Silver Dollar Girls is my tribute, not only to Mom, but to all of the WASP, as well as to strong women, and women who are not yet aware of how strong they are. I can't let this opportunity pass without mentioning one more woman who embodied the spirit of all the WASP. So Devin Riley was a pilot and a friend of the museum, and a gracious role model for girls and young women. My sister and I met Devin out here at the 2023 homecoming. Devin was awestruck to find out that our mom was a WASP, and we were awestruck by the sheer force that was Devin. She was tragically killed on a crash a few months later. Devin Riley was truly a silver dollar girl, and Mom would have absolutely loved her. So Silver Dollar Girls is for sale in the gift shop, and I would be very happy to sign copies if you'd like. Please pardon my shameless merchandising. But I'm really happy to answer questions about Mom or the WASP. And I want to thank you all for, again, giving me the opportunity to talk about my mom and the WASP. So, thank you. Thanks. If you have any questions, great. Yes?
I have a question. It sounds like from the last 2 days, they didn't talk much about their experience to their children, or not a lot. Do you think some of them had regrets? I mean, they left such an important effort. They did something women had never done before. Now, your mother obviously kept going on as an instructor for a while, but some of them just went back and raised kids.
Exactly. Yes. So I don't think, so from my perspective, I can't imagine that any WASP regretted being a WASP and regretted their experience. But they would, every single one of them, they not only regretted what happened to them. A lot of, they were hurt by it. There was anger, I'm sure. It was insulting. It was, for many of them, that hurt stayed with them, meant most of their lives. I think they were all hurt by it. Some of them moved on faster than others. Some of them never talked about their experiences, maybe because they were still hurt and didn't want to talk about it. Maybe because, like my mom, she just moved on. I have no idea. But yeah, there was regret. Every single one of them regretted what happened to them. And almost to a person, they offered to stay on for $1 a year if they could keep flying. And of course, that was not accepted, but that's how much they wanted to keep flying.
Thank you.
Yep. So, anyway, thank you all for being here.